in
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low. See, this is the only thing I could think of that's probably in the public domain.
When I said, let's think of a theme song that's in the public domain, I was not thinking about no swing low, sweet chariot.
All right, folks.
To this, people, this is why you don't do this right before you go on air and say we should have a public domain theme song.
Well, I can't do happy birthday. I mean, that's one of the crazy things.
That's under copyright.
That's under copyright.
You have to pay like $10,000
for some
to use
reason.
happy birthday. Yeah.
I don't have $10,000 for a theme song.
No.
Anyway, my name's Atiba Ellis.
And I'm Nariessa Smith.
And this is We the People of Color, the podcast dedicated to talking about the law, politics, and a little bit of crazy culture for people of color and everyone to consider, especially in this election.
Absolutely. And this is our 4th episode. We're on episode 4. We got a new hope.
We do.
New hope for democracy.
See, and I wanted to hum the Star Wars theme, but talk about
I don't want
copyright.
George Lucas coming after me.
No. George Lucas. Forget George Lucas. I'm talking Disney. I mean, this will be Black Panther coming after me. No.
Yeah, no. Mickey and them don't play around with the copyright. They will shut it down. Yeah, the House of Mouse. They are well known for that. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Not.
So,
do we want to take this moment to just talk about what's been going on this week? Do we want to jump right to the sponsors? What's your thoughts on this?
Well, I think we go sponsor first. I mean, it's important. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to announce that this week's sponsor is...
Hold on. I want... Talk, Atiba, talk. Go ahead.
But that's the point. There is the mute button. And I hit the mute button as I was announcing the sponsor. Those of you just listening and can't see the video, that 5 seconds of silence was me laying on the mute button. And as we know, the mute button was the big winner of last night's debate.
Yeah. But can we talk about how sad it is that the same protocol that somebody would apply to a 4-year-old worked for the 74-year-old president of the United States? Can we talk about how sad that is? That treating him like a child seemed to be the only way to rein him in.
Yeah. I mean, it is the tactic of basically this debate season is one big episode of 2 toddlers sitting in the back seat and the parent going, don't make me pull this debate over. Don't make me pull it. I will come back there and mute your talk. I mean, look, it's a little crazy.
It is. But in all fairness, I had to say, yes, Joe was, in the first debate, but he was responding to what he was being given. They actually did the stats. Trump interrupted in that first debate 71 times and Biden interrupted 22 times. So Trump was like 3 times as worse. And so the idea that people are like, well, they both did it, blah, blah, blah. It's the same thing as saying that an ice cube from your refrigerator is the same as the ice shelf in Antarctica. Same in kind, different in degree, not even the same. Not even the same. And
no. You just evoked Ice Cube, and that's a whole.
Why you gotta bring your boy into this?
You brought your boy into this.
You brought your boy into this.
Anyway.
I said, and Ice Cube. I did not talk about Craig from Friday. You brought that up.
All right. Anyway, but we talked about that in our last episode, so. If you're watching on YouTube, go back to the prior episode and we talked about all the rappers who are throwing their hands into politics. But this week, speaking of the debate, right? I think the thing
Mhm.
that we have to take seriously for a minute, I'm going to put my finger on the button right here. I'm going to start the clock. So the thing we need to take seriously for a minute is the fact that this debate revolved around, I mean, look, it was two different visions of America.
Very different.
And the fact of the matter is, you got a choice in front of you. But I want to bring up a different choice. And this brings us to a quick 1 minute on which president should we compare Donald Trump to? I mean, he made the
Abraham Lincoln,
argument.
obviously, duh.
Well, that's what he said. But I think you and
And
I
we know
have a couple
Trump
of
is
different
honest
ideas.
and reasonable in his assessment of himself at all times.
And
Because he's a
every
very
public
stable
statement
genius, you know.
and every statement that President Trump makes is based on objective evidence,
And
verifiable
facts, yeah.
by
Not
scholars and researchers,
and not alternative facts.
not alternative facts, notwithstanding what. But anyway, but here's the question: which president? I don't think it's Abraham Lincoln. I just have to straight up
Yeah,
disagree with
I'm gonna
that.
go ahead and say no. No. And by the way, you all should know, tell them your history bona fides, sir.
So I did both a bachelor's in history and a master's in history at Duke University, and I wrote a thesis on the poll tax in the South. And so I have paid attention to the 20th century and the 19th. And so here we are in the 21st trying to figure out which president ought we to compare Donald Trump to. I mean, he says he's greater than the greatest president that we've had. Not that Lincoln was great, but at
No.
least before he died, he came round to the right position. Ask yourself
And
whether Trump is doing that now. I mean,
yeah, and what kills me to no end is to see the fact, as we talked about in the last podcast, of these men of color who would support this man. It's not justifiable. So, but the question on the table, because we're going to talk about that later in the hour, but the question on the table is, which president do you think he should be comparing himself to? Because obviously we agree that it's not Honest Abe.
I think it might be Andrew Johnson, the president who
Why?
came after him. He was impeached. His impeachment ended up not resulting in his removal of office because of political grounds. He basically tried to undo a lot of what his predecessor, Abraham Lincoln, did. So rather than say he's like Lincoln because he's done so much, particularly for the Black community, this is his like literal claim. He's done more for the Black community than any president since Abraham Lincoln. My argument is he's done more to undo what presidents have done for the Black community, particularly since Barack Obama. So,
oh, well, we know how he feels about Mr. Obama.
But that's the pattern, right? Obama set up Obamacare. Trump's trying to knock it down. Trump says he has a replacement for Obamacare. Where's that?
With the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot somewhere. That's where it is.
Don't forget the UFOs. It's in Roswell.
Well, the UFOs are in
hasn't made it to
Roswell.
Congress.
That is true. That is the true fact, though. That's not like, Nessie and all that. Area 51, we know that there's some stuff in Area 51. We just don't know what, though. Whether or not it's UFOs, I don't know.
I'm saying there are a lot of bills that benefit America generally and people of color specifically that folks have been waiting for. We're still waiting. And there's a lot of policies that help people of color that are getting undone by the Trump administration. Healthcare, education, voting rights, which we'll get to in a minute.
Yeah, trying to steal my segment, man.
I'm just saying. Andrew Johnson is the better comparison.
I have my pick too, but there's a dark horse that we didn't even nominate. And I was like, oh yeah, Andrew Jackson. Mr. Trail of Tears himself. We didn't even put him on the roster, but he belongs there. He
So
belongs there.
putting DACA immigrants and children in cages is the Trail of Tears for the 21st century.
And if we can just take a moment, it's not part of our show today, but please, the 525 children of color who are now effectively orphaned because of this man. And to the people in your family who want to say, like Trump tried to say last night, well, who built the cages, right? Let's be clear. The cages are not great, but it was never the policy of the Obama administration to separate children from parents. Never. And we know this because there were a series of memos that were written in that time where someone in the Obama administration had floated that idea, and people were like, no, kill that. We would not do that. That's a bridge too far. For Trump and them, it's not even a bridge too far. It's just the first bridge. Let's see how else we can be cruel. And the awful thing about it is they've gone so far as to say, as he said in the debate last night, well, it's not so bad that they're separated from their parents because they're being kept in great place. What if you are separated from your parent? It doesn't matter if you're in the Waldorf Astoria. It's horrible. It's unconscionable. And
a gilded
they
cage
ought
is
to be
still a
ashamed.
cage.
Amen. Right?
A gilded cage is still a cage. But we have one more person to compare on the list.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry. When I think about those kids, I get super passionate. But
no, I hear you. I hear you.
When we were talking about it, my pick is Woodrow Wilson. If Donald Trump is going to compare himself to any U.S. president, it needs to be Woodrow Wilson. Why? Because before Donald Trump, Woodrow Wilson held the mantle of being the most racist. And keep in mind, right? Well, at least of the modern era of the ones who didn't actually own African people, because I think you got to throw them in there. But setting those folks aside, the ones that didn't actually own human beings or actually, lead the Trail of Tears, I'm going to throw in Woodrow Wilson. Why? A lot of people don't know, but in the 1910s, right, in the 19 teens, actually the federal government wasn't segregated. And people could work there. Wilson, when he's elected, he resegregates the federal government to the point there was one black man who was working there in DC, and they put a cage around this man to enforce segregation. And we know that because W.E.B. Du Bois wrote a letter to Wilson and was saying this is really bad. He loved the KKK. He loved the sun, so much so that he held a screening of the horrible movie Birth of a Nation, which has been described as a love letter to the Klan, at the White House, and said it was his favorite movie. Now, of course, there's only like 3 movies. Movies had just been invented. It was only but 3 of them, but that was his favorite one. And he was known to be a vehement racist. So if Donald Trump is going to compare himself to anybody, I would say it would be Wilson, because Wilson's support of the Klan is much like Trump's, defense of, the white supremacists, or telling the Proud
Charlottesville good,
the good. Thank you. I was just the good people on both sides.
And his shout out in the first debate to the Proud Boys.
Yeah, and my African American over there. He's to use a colloquial phrase, and this is not to be for the younger viewers or even for some of the older ones. We do not believe in shaming of any sort on this podcast. We do not believe in any kind of ism, right? So I want to be very clear that what I'm about to say is not involving ableism in any way, right? But the way to describe Donald Trump, though, is what the old folks used to say. I mean, the boy ain't right. The boy ain't right in the head when it comes to so many things. But when it comes to race, especially, he can't seem to. He will not admit. He did not admit last night that systemic racism was even a thing. He tends to harp on his idea that he's great is that he helped 2 or 3 or 20 black folks and 2 or 3 or 20 black folks like him, even though with the passing of Herman Cain, the number of black folks that like him dipped by like 25%, you know, because now all he got is Kanye, Ben Carson, and I'm gonna count what's their names, polyester and rayon, I'm gonna count them as one, you know. So yeah, all of those things, I picked Woodrow Wilson
But
as my pick.
so I mean, we're not historians here arguing causation, certainly, but I think it's what's really fair to say too, and what we will get to before we're done is sort of thinking about, well, I mean, I look at it this way. I mean, part of this to me is about recognizing representation and recognizing that mindsets have evolved, and just looking at Donald Trump's life, you know, what I can't forget is the Central Park 7, right? I can't, and Trump's reaction to all that and his well-documented
And can I just pause you right quick, bro? With the Central Park 5, can you please break it down to the folks who may not know? Just tell them quickly, for those, there's a great documentary on it. Ava DuVernay made a Netflix series about it. But if you haven't seen either of those or haven't read about it, and like it seems, technically we're not historians. Both of us have studied history. I technically teach history right now as well, but tell them about the Central Park 5.
No. And my point is simply, you know, we're not. Well, really quick. The point, though, is that back in the day, was it the 70s or early 80s? I'm not even recalling it right off the top of my head. But the bottom line point is there were a number of people of color, Latinx folks, we would say today, and who were accused of committing a rape in Central Park. And to make a long story short, part of the public dispute about these accusations was Donald Trump sent a public letter, arguing against these brothers, right? And I mean, and he also sort of very loudly said, you know, we should do the death penalty, we should do all this, that, and the other. I mean, this is in essence a 70s and 80s version of the kind of treatment that these men would have gotten 50 years prior to that, you know, and in essence, you know, when you're arguing for what is in effect a state-sanctioned lynching, even though the evidence proved that none of this was warranted, you know, this is problematic. And my argument is simply his rhetoric around race, I don't think has evolved in any way, shape, or form in the 40 years since then.
No.
So,
and I mean, his daddy, we know, had ties to the Klan and other things. And sadly, this is a case where it doesn't seem like the apple fell too far from the rotten tree or the racist tree.
So, I mean, with that point being said, the beauty of American elections is every 4 years, we get to fire or rehire who's holding the office, right? And so that brings us to our weekly segment, This Week in Voter Suppression. So,
and it's sad. Can I just reiterate, as I do every week, how sad it is that we got to do this segment every week.
Every week.
Because it's always something. Always. This is the one segment that we never run out of material for.
And even after the election, I mean, let's be honest, we may still well be having these conversations, because when we get to protecting the vote, once the ballots are cast and counted and the election's resolved, we're still going to have to talk about, well, how do we do the next one better? That's the way responsible policymakers think, you know? And so, but let's talk about it for a minute, because there is so much to cover, and Lord knows I don't have enough time now that we've just spent what ended up being 15 minutes on the de facto Here's
Well,
why people
I'll
of
save a
color need
little
to
bit
be
of my time to you. Yeah.
yeah. Here's why people of color need to be cautious about Donald Trump. And I'll actually come right back and say to connect to last week, I mean, regardless of your political position, you can be a liberal, you can be a conservative, but if you've had this long and consistent of a record of backing racist policies, and in this I'm evoking Ibram X. Kendi's racist or anti-racist approach to thinking about things, then you got to wonder whether or not this is the person you want to vote for. And let's just hit it head on. Yes, Joe Biden has had his challenges too in this regard, but we'll be talking about that a little bit before the show's over. But the short of it, from my point of view, is that Joe Biden worked to collaborate. And I'm thinking of the Crime Bill 94, and Joe Biden collaborated with, the Congressional Black Caucus and civil rights groups and was working towards something that communities of color felt they needed. Did they make a mistake? Probably, given the consequences of the 94 crime bill. But there's a big difference between being willing to listen to the community and then claiming that you worked hard for the community and that you're the best president since Lincoln for Black people, but then where are the receipts?
See, that's what I'm talking about. This bruh is receiptless. No receipts. No receipts.
No receipts?
None at all.
Doesn't he owe $1 billion? I mean, I'm just saying.
Yeah, that's all he got receipts for is all the money that he. Oh, and his Chinese tax bill from his Chinese. He got receipts from the Chinese ATM where his Chinese bank account is, but he does not have receipts for anything he's done for Black people. No receipts whatsoever.
And to me, this is part of the reason why they're fighting so hard about voter suppression, right? Again, and this is a point we need to echo every week. What it comes down to is when the government makes it harder to vote, people are less likely to vote. When the government makes it harder to vote, people are less likely to vote. And for reasons that may be true among the majority, those reasons double or triple down for communities of color, right? So this is why we're seeing the battle of voter suppression. And this week, the battle is literally blowing up in ways that are not just about 2020 and about the pandemic, but they're about voter suppression in terms of race. For example, talking about the literal blow up, did you hear about the ballot box drop box in California that somebody threw a bomb in and burnt up, right?
That is just ridiculous. But and I want to ask you about this. What about this rhetoric about there's going to be voter fraud? How does that embolden these folks to go out there and do foolish things like setting ballot boxes on fire?
Well, not just setting ballot boxes on fire, but getting into people's faces and challenging their vote, spreading disinformation about, the Republicans vote on Tuesday and the Democrats vote on Wednesday. I mean, this links back to voter fraud because it's sending a message that people of color are out to mess up the election. I mean, every time you hear vote by mail is fraudulent or hear these people who are attempting to impersonate other voters, I mean, all of that noise, it's, as Ian Haney Lopez puts it, a dog whistle in the sense of you're evoking racial stereotypes. And the people who support this mess hear that.
This is me raising my hand, Professor.
They hear that and then go target people of color.
Can we just say that Trump has just lost the dog whistle? This fool got a bullhorn. He's given up with the dog whistle. He isn't dog whistling as Ian Haney Lopez would have said. Now Trump is just like, here, boy. he's lost the whistle.
And you know, I mean, one of my favorite Twitter accounts is Racism Watchdog, and Watchdog's barking loud against all this noise that she's hearing, right? But the point is, playing out these stereotypes also feeds into a long history of voter intimidation, right? In the Jim Crow era, it was open and countenance. I mean, we have the receipts in the 1860s and 70s, even before Jim Crow started, you know, the government cooperating with open segregationists to deter Black people from voting. I mean, my goodness, the most important civil rights law on the books today was entitled the Anti-Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. It hasn't been repealed because Congress knows that it's still needed. These kinds of conspiracies can exist. And I'm not talking QAnon, I'm not talking the sort of made up stuff. But my point is, all this sort of made up stuff about voter fraud feeds the paranoia, and that it emboldens people to get up in other people's faces. But that doesn't mean you can't vote or you shouldn't vote. What it means is, when you go to the polling place, when you go to cast your ballot, know where the election observers are, know where the election judge is. And if someone gets up in your face, don't punch back. You call the cops, you call the election judge. They're supposed to be there to maintain the integrity of the election, to make sure everyone can cast the ballot fairly, right? So, you know, and all I'm saying is, Trump has been putting out those calls, and so we just have to be careful and watch our backs when we go vote.
Yeah, which is sad. How do you recommend people do that? What are the sort of things that they should be doing to watch their backs? In addition to what you said, looking for the election protection folks, other things, anything else you would recommend?
So also, before we forget, you know, we said it last week, we're going to say it right now. 1-866 our vote, right? And if you can't get to any of those people, call that line. There are election monitors on that phone who know what to do and who will tell you how to handle any situation that you run into. And by the way, and we've talked a lot about, you know, I don't want to jump to protecting our vote too quickly, but can we be real in terms of, if you can't cast your vote by mail or through a drop box today, you need to plan to go vote in person on or before election day, because the mail is supposed to take it up to 7 days. But we don't know, given all the things that have been happening to the Postal Service. And when you go vote, you know, be ready for long lines. I would say go in groups, go as a community. Don't just go by yourself, because somebody, you know, don't leave yourself vulnerable in that way. And also, as a big picture issue, don't think that just because the national poll might have Biden in the lead by double digits means that you can stay home. Polls change. People don't tell the truth to pollsters sometimes. And the fact of the matter is, you know, people not going out to vote thinking that it was a lock for Hillary Clinton is part of the reason why we got into this mess in the first place. So,
I'm sorry. I just wanted to add to that. And it's going to seem like I'm off topic, but I promise I'm not. There is this overlooked Chris Rock movie called Head of State, where he's running to be, he's trying to be the first Black president, right?
I love Head of State.
Yes. So you remember that scene at the end where, you know, it looks like Chris Rock's character is going to win, right? And there's this great shot is slow-mo, and it's all of these white voters in
Right.
California, and they're like,
And,
no.
and remember the setup to that. The setup was like some Rush Limbaugh like radio guy basically got on and was like, now hear this. It may well be that Chris Rock's character wins. And then it's just like in the Simi Valley, California, and then 3, 2, 1. No. You got like 1,000 people on the street running to vote.
Yeah, and so because we have seen so many people of color online, waiting to vote, and we know that they're probably voting for Biden, for the most part, if statistics bear us out. So how do we know that some folks who are on the fence aren't going to see that and be like, I got to come out here and make sure, that Trump's going to win because he's going to, stand with the police and not let the black people come and riot in my neighborhood, which the chances of black folks rioting in somebody's neighborhood, not that,
that's
high.
the thing, right? The data says folks voting for the Democrats are using early voting, they're using mail-in voting, and the Republicans vote on election day. The point of this is the polls don't capture that. So go vote for whoever you're going to vote for, have a plan for voting. Now, there was a very important decision of the Supreme Court this week regarding Pennsylvania. About that, well, no, I wanted to save that for next week, given the time. Okay. The short of it is the Supreme Court declined to interfere with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision to extend the deadline for absentee ballots by 3 days. But this is so important. I'm going to save this for next week because it might signal another Bush v. Gore. In other words, it signals to me that the Supreme Court, especially when they install Judge Barrett,
Jesse, the handmaid,
may well work to interfere with the 2020 election. We need to get ready for that. And so we'll talk about, I want to save that one for next week. But what I do want to get back to is, we were riffing about Donald Trump's history regarding race. But I want to talk about what he's done in the last 4 years, And yes. With a shout out to Janet Jackson, this brings us to this segment entitled,
What Have You Done For Me Lately? And I'm surprised all of y'all didn't leave the podcast with me singing. But suffice it to say, so happy that y'all are here and really thrilled to be talking about this because, quite frankly, when he was talking last night, and this is not the first time he said it, obviously, but I've done more for black people than anyone since Abraham Lincoln. First of all, how dare you have the audacity to even say that? Number two, as Atiba alluded to, we know that Lincoln's legacy wasn't spotless, right? And number three, don't act like you're the Lyndon Johnson of the new millennium. If a civil rights bill came across your desk, there's no way you were going to sign it unless it was civil rights protections for white folks. So I just want to talk. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Interject real quick. Let's be real, though. There are a bunch of civil rights bills pending in Congress right now, pending on Mitch McConnell's desk.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So don't forget this. Aquaman's got,
he's powerful in those limited doses. Yeah.
But he told the whole rest of the Justice League to hold up to pass things, including voting rights for the interest of people of color. But this just simply underscores the question. What has Trump done for people of color lately?
The answer, sir, to use, and I know we try to be we try not to get technical and use legal jargon, but to answer your question, sir, to use a technical legal phrase, what has Donald Trump done for African Americans? The legal technical answer is not a damn thing. That is the legal jargon that is the appropriate answer to that question. So
the Latin for that is nope, nothing, and nada.
Yeah, exactly. So what Trump has done, let's talk about what he builds his brand on. He's been so proud of saying, oh, well, I've done more for the economy and I've gotten African Americans, on the economy, the lowest unemployment. Well, this is the one time when Donald Trump might have been telling the truth about something, because a broken clock is right twice a day. It is true that both the unemployment rate and the poverty rate for African Americans are lower under Trump. But here's the thing that you got to keep in mind. Number one, they've only been keeping track of it since 1972. So who knows, what happened, before then. But even then, if you look at it, and I encourage all of you all who are listening to Google this, it was already headed that way under Obama. Under Obama is where you see the curve start to go and take the dive, right? So under Obama, Black employment went from 12.6% to 7.5%. That is a ridiculous achievement that he was able to do. So the most Trump can say is that he didn't mess up what Obama put into place. And I think it's so infuriating that the Republicans, I remember very well when Clinton was president, they couldn't say this for Obama because Bush tanked the economy right before the election. But I remember with Clinton, they were always saying, oh, well, he's such a, he's not great on the economy. He inherited the great Reagan Bush economy. But they never say that Trump inherited a really good economy from Obama. So there's that. So all these gains that Trump is talking about, it was the Obama era policies that got that trajectory going down. And so all Trump can say is that in the first few years of his term, and I'm going to come back to this in a second, in the first few years of his term, he didn't mess it up until he did, because then this fool comes in and he gets information in January 2020 that there is a pandemic coming out of China. And he gets it, he hears that it's dangerous, and he does nothing. He does nothing about it. And that allows us to be in the situation in which we find ourselves. What does that have to do with Black folks? Because guess who's been hit hardest health-wise during this pandemic? Just research this. Black folks are 2.5 times more likely to get coronavirus than white folks, 4 times more likely to go to the hospital with it, and 2.5 times more likely to die. So that's just your physical well-being, right? Then he wants to talk about, his economy. Well, now everything that Obama started, right, and that Trump was lucky enough not to mess up somehow, has now been torpedoed. The unemployment rate is right back up. It's like 14% higher than the Obama era. Way higher, and twice what it was when Obama left office. And now we have the situation where anywhere from, depending on who you ask, because I found different numbers, 40 to 50% of African American or Latinx households, don't have any adult working. And yeah, but he won't take credit for that. He's not going to take credit for that because he never does. So that's the other piece. And the other place that I want to take this is, and you can feel free to jump in here too if you think of something, but the other place that I know I wanted to go is what really makes me mad about Trump's approach, because he's always talking about, you notice how he always hits the money and, unemployment and poverty, numbers down. Let's assume for a second that everything I told you about what Obama did was not true. let's assume that Obama didn't do any of those things that I told you about that allowed the numbers to go down. Let's assume that Trump did something in January 2017 that helped economically, that helped people of color economically. Let's assume that. That assumes that money is everything. And as everyone's parents, hopefully, well, not Fred and Mary Trump, clearly, but money isn't everything. And it really isn't everything for people of color. So many studies, again, that have talked about the level of stress that people of color have been under during this presidency and the level of racial stress. You have the president of the United States who has a bully pulpit up here talking about white supremacists killing people at protests, peaceful protests. Well, there's good people on both sides. You have him calling Black Lives Matter peaceful protesters murderers. You have him, as we talked about, separating brown babies from their parents at the border. You have him calling that deadly virus, calling it the China virus and the Kung flu, which led to this horrible outbreak of racism against the Asian American community. You have him out here. You have him out here. The very first thing he did after taking office was that Muslim ban, right?
Well,
and then he's calling certain countries shithole countries. And you know, and we know which countries they were. He wanted to trade Puerto Rico for Greenland.
Oh,
all of that racial stress.
Oh, you forgot. You forgot.
Oh, I forgot one. Oh, okay, my bad.
You forgot the executive order banning all conversation about critical race theory and diversity training, right?
Yeah.
Because not only is it all those things that you just mentioned, it is making as a matter of executive policy the idea of colorblindness, the idea that no, we can't talk about race at all. And it also look at, what was it, the proclamation that he issued for Columbus Day, which sort of blamed conversation about race for degrading the country and then upholding sort of the great virtue of Christopher Columbus. And, you know, do your homework on this about the rape and pillaging and the bringing of disease that Christopher Columbus did for the indigenous populations here in the United States. Because, you know, Christopher Columbus got here in 1492, but there were people in the United States for tens of thousands of years before that, right? So,
yeah. But the only Christopher that we appreciate on this podcast is Wallace and Evans. So,
so it's language that echoes racial subjugation, policies. Oh, and actually, and that brings up a question: how many bills would you chalk up to actually sincerely helping people of color that have been passed by the Trump administration?
I'll give one, and then, well, I'm going to go back to one thing that I didn't talk about, and then I'm going to answer your question. Also, we can't forget, he has been horrible toward the LGBT community. Had the nerve to send his daughter over to a Trump Pride event looking like a methed out Barbie doll, doing an impression of Marilyn Monroe, and up there, yeah, just horrible. But the LGBT community is part of the Black community, is part of the Latinx community, is part of the Asian American community. So to the point that he's hurting them, he's also hurting our communities, because we know that the violence against the LGBT community is visited more on LGBT folks of color. For instance, trans women, you know, being raped and attacked at such high numbers. It's unconscionable. It's a racial justice issue just as much as it is an LGBT rights issue. And we, as our collective communities, need to recognize that and stand up for them as well.
Right. These problems intersect. But under the Trump administration, if I were talking to anyone in the federal government as a paid lecturer, I can't talk about intersectionality. I
Nope,
mean, that's the
you
problem.
can't.
It's not just
Nope.
oppressive, it's trying to silence the conversation that people of color need to have and that movements like Black Lives Matter have been trying to have.
And it really goes and regresses because so many folks and everybody who is a person of color listening to this podcast has had something. Well, if you're over a certain age, if you've had any sort of job for more than 6 months, you know that you've been in a position where some racist or questionable stuff has happened on the job. And by Trump really going out here and saying that people can't have consultants who come in and talk about the root of the problem, he doesn't want to get to the root of the problem because he wants those folks to be able to act with impunity. There is a law professor that both of us know whose name I will not say because I can't stand him, but there are folks who would say and argue that the law does not protect the anti-discrimination laws, that those laws violate the First Amendment because you ought to be able to say what you want to say even in the workplace, as long as you don't touch anybody, right? You ought to be able to say what you want to say, and people ought to have a thick skin. But I'm telling you, we all have read cases and seen things where people have gone through horrible things in the workplace, where they have been forced to deal with just ridiculous levels of racism. And over time, what psychologists and doctors have found is that it wears on people of color psychologically and eventually physically. And I know that we say black don't crack, brown don't frown, and Asian don't raisin, but eventually it catches up to us on the inside, which is why we have all of these health disparities and why every single group of color, Native, Asian, African American, Latinx, were all dying at higher rates during this pandemic. Access to
And,
healthcare is a big part of that too,
and
which, and I know you want to get it, but I wanted to go to that too, but go ahead.
well, no. I'm saying we need to go there, but everything you just said made me think that on the role of topics that we need to keep in mind and spend more time talking about, especially after the election is done and dusted, mental health. I mean, everything you were
I
talking
just dusted
about.
the election.
Hmm?
I snapped. You couldn't see me. I said, you said done and dusted, so I had to Thanos. I can't.
Oh, you
That's
had to
what.
stand.
How come?
Don't make
How come?
Disney come after us.
But
I
see, all I did was say his name, though. So what they gonna
okay.
do? Send the ghost to Stan Lee after me? You know, they not they. But I
But
mean, can we
seriously
just
though,
say this will be the thing that
mental
comes
health.
out of this episode? If you have any young people in your life, just tell them to vote. Why? So we can Thanos snap Donald Trump out of office on November 3rd. Just dust him
But
away.
I'm saying we need to come back and just have, we could just do a whole episode on mental health and people of color because it matters and it's important. Now, speaking of episodes, we're coming close to the end of this. We need to, this week, we have
Yeah,
so
we
much
gotta wrap
stuff
it up.
on the table. We just decided to have a quick, like 10-minute round robin. We're just going to rapid fire talk about a bunch of issues.
I wish we had a ticking clock sound. Tick, 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 like the 60 minutes clock. That's another. Your fool, we could have had 60 minutes of sponsor. Your boy just ran out on Leslie Stahl because she said she was asking him tough questions. Get your boy. Get your boy.
What about them giving Leslie Stahl a whole big folder of blank pages? I mean, you get your boy. So,
Like I said, that boy ain't right.
all right, we got 10 minutes and a
And some
list of
change.
hot topics.
All right, yeah, we're gonna round robin this. We're gonna go real fast. All right, you start, I start. Where do we go? You scream, I scream. We all scream for the ice cream.
All right. So I'll go first and say, you know, a lot of people talk about felon disenfranchisement like it's a thing of the past, but it isn't, particularly for people of color. And the battles around felon disenfranchisement, I think, are going to increase rather than decrease. Here's why. We've alluded to it in a couple of episodes, but I'm just going to take 2 minutes right here to talk about it. Amendment 4, Florida. For those of you who don't know the story, in 2018, the people of the state of Florida passed a referendum banning permanent disenfranchisement for cause of having a felony conviction record from their state constitution. And it was their power to do so under that state's law. Unlike other states, though, like Iowa and Virginia, where that was the end of it, it wasn't. Almost the day after the amendment passed by nearly 70%, so a super majority of Floridians wanted to re-enfranchise, and we're talking 1.4, 1.5 million people who were casting votes. And by the way, that 20 years ago, we had similar problems with voter purges in Florida during Bush v. Gore. But I'll talk about that a little bit next week when I talk about Pennsylvania and this court, Bush v. Gore, and all that. But here's the issue to keep your eye on, right? The Florida legislature passed the bill basically saying, okay, if the amendment says on the completion of your sentence, you can be re-enfranchised, the Florida legislature said condition of sentence includes paying all fines and all fees. Now, for many under this law, we're talking 5-6 figures, basically from interest and fees. And worse yet, the state of Florida doesn't exactly know how much money any given felon knows because of its decentralized system. Like the state doesn't have the records. They want to point to the county. They want to point it here, one point it there. So there are lots of Floridians, maybe 1 million, who can't vote in this election because the 11th Circuit upheld this law. And so felon disenfranchisement has effectively become another poll tax. And I will say it loud and clear. I am on the record as having signed a brief in front of that 11th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals arguing that this law violates the poll tax. It takes money out of people's pocket and gives it to the government in exchange for casting a vote. And given that most people with records of felony convictions are people of color, it matters to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that was wonderful. That was wonderful. My round robin is supposed to be on the census, and I'm going to take it really quickly and just use a little bit of it to say I was talking about Trump's economic thing. The other thing that he says, I freed so many black people and blah. He's talking about two things: the people whose sentences that he's commuted, which are only like 20 people. So no, he is not using his pardon or his commutation power to just set black folks free. And the First Step Act. Again, and we can come back and revisit it in this next time. But also, no, that's a lie. Like almost everything Trump says. Almost everything about Trump is a lie, from the top of his whatever that is on his head to the bottom of his tiny feet. So we know that. But about the census, if y'all were maybe paying attention, you might have heard this week that they wanted to, the Trump administration, after agreeing with Congress briefly to extend the census count period, has now stopped it. And a big part of that has to do with people of color, because now the Trump administration, they don't want people who are undocumented to be counted. That is a horrible thing for communities of color, because communities of color notoriously don't like to fill out government documents anyway. Can you blame folks? But nope. In addition to that, so race is a big part of why this is still being fought about. This is another reason why it's important for folks to get out and vote, because these census numbers, they not only determine money, right, that you will get for schools, roads, all of this stuff, but they also determine how the state legislatures will draw the districts that we will be voting with for at least the next 10 years. So if we have bad data, those districts are going to be drawn horribly, and that's going to reduce the voting power of groups of color. So we need to be watching that. Not enough time to do a full segment on it this time, but be watching and be very wary about what you've heard about the census. And if Biden wins, there might be a way to fix it, and we can talk about that at a later podcast. But just want to throw it out there for you guys that them cutting off the census has a lot of racial overtones and consequences for people of color. Round robin, back to you, bro.
All right. So here's my one more thing about protecting your vote, right? Make sure that you meet all the technical compliance, right? These folks out here, election judges, I mean, yeah, it's their job to sort of get rid of the illegitimate votes and keep the legitimate votes. But we're seeing stories from all over the country these days about how the technical compliance is becoming so needling and that it's hurting people of color, right? There's stories about ballots being thrown out because lack of signature match. There are stories about the rates of absentee ballot rejection being higher for people of color. I mean, it's there. There are, and this is part of the story of voter suppression, right? There are folks who want to just use every detail possible to throw out as many votes as possible. And I can only presume, I can't read people's minds, but some of these folks are probably thinking most of these absentee ballots are going to go for the Democrats, for Biden, but the people in person are going to go for Republicans. I mean, it's an old game, as old as Jim Crow. So protect yourself by making sure that you follow the requirements to the letter. If it requires a signature match, make sure it's a signature just like the signature that you put when you registered or when you got your driver's license. If it's getting a witness, make sure to get the witness and make sure it's properly done. If it's
can I get a witness? Ain't just for in church.
No. And yet, yes. So, make sure to take care of your vote. However you vote, make sure it counts. We need it to count. That's my one more thing. What's your one more thing?
My last thing on the round robin is, here's another thing. I know that I have been talking about Amy Coney Island Barrett so much. However, that's my baby's one. She came up with that one. But
it was good.
Yeah, she's funny. The idea that we have that this woman could be on the court for who knows how long, it became even more real because the Supreme Court, and remember, the Supreme Court doesn't have to hear every case that's presented to them, but they just agreed to hear a case that should concern all folks of color. Because there was this man, and I am going to forget, California, a man in California, and he was thinking, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to be driving. And he was driving and a police officer followed him, right? And, he was listening to loud music, honking his horn. That's all he did. This man gets all the way home, pulls into his garage, and the officer had on the lights, right? But did not use his siren. So who knows what it's for. So the man, Mr. Lang, he enters his house. He's inside, but the officer enters the garage by putting the foot under. You know how when you have the automatic garage door thingy, if you put something under it, it won't stop because it has that safety net. So kids or pets get caught in the garage door. So the cop puts his foot under that and comes in, and the officer starts speaking to him. It's like, oh yeah, you have alcohol on your breath. And then he gets a DUI, which of course we're not in favor of DUI. But the idea, this is how they're trying to justify this. For those of you who don't do criminal law and not lawyers, almost every time the police enter your property, they have to have a warrant. There are a few exceptions to this. One of these exceptions is if there's what they call an exigent circumstance, basically an emergency, right? So if a police officer is walking past your house and you have the window up, which as person of color, you probably don't, but that's a whole nother topic podcast. So if you have the window open and a police officer sees you being attacked, they don't need to wait for
They're trying to kill me. Help! Help!
Exactly,
then the officer can
right?
run in.
Yeah, they can run it because that's an emergency, right? However, what happened here, a guy driving and honking his horn, playing loud music, there is nothing that's an emergency about that. And every person of color should be alarmed hearing about this, because if this Supreme Court, especially, see, people talk about the conservatives in terms of Obamacare and in terms of affirmative action and voting rights, and we should, but this is about to be a horrible court for criminal justice issues. So I guarantee you that this court with Justice Handmaid is going to definitely do everything it can to give the police more leeway. And I cannot imagine what it would be like if the police could use a small traffic infraction and use it to invoke their emergency powers. That is just a world that is very scary. So
big of an exception that it erases the rule. Yeah,
there you go.
That's frightening. That's frightening. And we
Yeah.
definitely need to spend some more time on that. But we've hit our hour, and we've covered it. And I will end by simply saying, how can I put this? CNN, if y'all looking for people to replace, Jeffrey Toobin, you got two of us right here.
Yeah, we'll do it.
We here.
And the thing is, neither one of us will act a fool on camera. You don't have to worry about it.
We're serious.
People of integrity, and we know what we're talking about.
And we're fully clothed. So with that, I'm Atiba Ellis.
I'm Nariessa Smith.
Thank you for joining the podcast. We'll
the
see you next
podcast that is of the people for the culture. Take care, y'all.
All right. Bye.